we're all different. We all see different. We're all different cells of the body, so to speak. And our calling, the thing that we're uniquely equipped to do, which can change throughout our life, but it's unique to us. So like what brings me alive, or the unique problem, a lot of times it shows up as the thing that bothers you. Like uniquely. Like there's so many areas of opportunity. There's so many areas that we could positively impact. It's basically infinite. What bothers me personally. I've done enough research on the systemic side of this to realize that there is it's straight out of the Bible. There's an agenda to give life to the fullest, and there's agenda to take that. And if you really extrapolate that to its logical conclusion, any amount of power or force is either motivated by one of those two spirits, spirit of life, the spirit of death. So if you open up under the hood of like the financial system, things like that, and understand the spiritual roots that everything was constructed from. When we talk about finances, really the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of Babylon, that both have a very structured system. One leads to slavery, one leads to freedom. And look around you. How many people could stop working and be destitute, or if they stopped working, they'd be destitute in how many paychecks? You pick the number of paychecks, 1 to 8, or that's 80% of America. That bothers me at its core, especially God's given me some gifts to be able to think about how things could be different. We have something called normalcy bias, which is to say, our generation, even our parents and even grandparents' generation, we literally don't even have the imagination to envision things too different from what they are now. If we actually had sound money and our labor was worth more, literally time with your spouse, time with your kids, there's money basically impacts every decision you've ever made, relationships, everything. So to have integrity, to have stuff just in that single area of influence, just has massive repercussions. So when I see people, I I tell stories like my grandparents and the Great Depression. And really for me, that is a personal story, but I can also, again, extrapolate how many other people were impacted by that event. Let's stay on that for a little bit. The Great Depression era, for those that don't study history, 1930s, what actually happened was, some people could say it's incompetence, but I learned too much to know it's not incompetence. It was done on purpose. They pulled the money out of circulation on purpose, called loans on purpose to take basically the breadbasket of America to foreclose on it. And that basically happened to huge swaths of Americans. And again, you can say, oh, it's just an accident. It's just how the banks work, or this, that, the next. I've learned too much to know that is just not the truth. They did it on purpose. Now, a lot of people were probably involved in that, didn't know what they were doing, but the spirit roots of the people in way at the top, 100% on purpose. And so it just matters. I don't know how to say it. Then the leadership, the spirit that the leaders follow matters. It impacts our lives every single day, for better or worse. And we have plenty of examples of for worse. I live in St. Paul, where they basically stopped enforcing the law. Okay, guess what that means? That means my wife, when she goes down to the park, has to wonder who's jumping out of the bushes. What the heck? Why? It's completely preventable. And it's, again, incompetence? No. Some people, yes, but it's on purpose to create a terrible environment, to weaken America, to weaken us. And I've just spent too much time to realize it's not on purpose. As much as that's real and true, the very opposite is also true. Like with a little bit of ownership, a little bit of leadership, let's not just complain. Like, we don't have to take it. We don't have to take it from these people. But we have to stand up and do something about it.
Mine is internal, and people don't know what God is really like in daily life for them. They don't know his heart towards them. They think he's a certain way. They think he's a prick. They think he's whatever. And I've experienced more and more of the reality of what he's really like. So it deeply saddens me when I see people living out of the wrong idea of God, which leads to a fear-based life, decision-making. Everything's pulled around by emotions because they're not grounded in the truth of who God really is. So,
as you were saying that, so we have this institution, the church, like obviously very valuable, hallowed institution. But how is it in a world, I think both Mick and I resonate with this idea that once you have a personal relationship with God and you start to understand who he is in profound ways to you personally, and then you go to a place that's not like systematically getting people to that understanding, what the heck? What are we doing?
exactly.
Now, put your hat on to the enemy. What would he want to do? You read the Bible? Sure, read your Bible. I mean, it's not my first choice, but if he can, what do they say? There's a verse that says like they have a form of religion, but it lacks power. Okay, that's what he wants. He wants people to kind of check the box, think they're doing good. But if you're not getting that, if you don't have a direct relationship with the Most High God, understanding he put you on this earth at this time and this season for a specific reason, if you're not getting there from wherever you're being fed spiritually, I have questions, right? And equipping you around that, right? Once you have a rough idea of who you are and where you're generally drawn to, there's so much more. It's like it should be the locker room, it should be the workout room, it should be where you come alive, where you're strengthened, where you're sent. Anything other than that is false. It's just less than the best. Let's just say it that way. And just for observation, it seems like there's movements outside the church that are much more engaged in that they're alive, they're nimble, they're connected. And I'm not saying bad things about all the church. It's just, if that's not happening, then the fullness of what the kingdom is can't happen. So say it like that. Well, in short, we don't know for sure. One of the ways I did a test for myself was, what brings me alive? So even if what I think might happen doesn't happen, would I have a heck of a time doing it in the meantime? And I backed into some of my theology, honestly, from that mentality. It was like, I actually don't know, and I probably can't know for sure. But the idea that I grew up with was basically, read Revelation, it all goes to hell in a handbasket. Mm-hmm. Statistically speaking, everyone feels like it's now, but of course it has to be, it's likely way in the future, it's just statistically speaking. So everyone's like, oh, we're in the end times. Now, for what it's worth, I do think we are in the end times, like the times. But people are looking for a Jesus ejection button. Like, oh, I want to be raptured. Like, really? You've been given this gift of life and it's so terrible that like you just want to be pulled away. Now I get that at a certain level. Or just that things are going to get worse and worse and worse, and then Jesus gets you. That's not exciting to me. What does that mean? What does that practically mean? Well, if you're a good Christian, go to church, be a good husband, be a good father. It's kind of boring, honestly. It's like, okay, like, yeah, let's assume I do that. I'm gonna do my best to do those things. What brings me alive? Well, it'd be like actually making things better. Like, oh, that's a challenge. That's exciting. Oh, it's outside the church. It's in an area that I'm actually gifted in, that I actually can make a difference in. Like Mick sells houses. Like that's all week long. You're interacting with people. You have opportunities to do stuff. Like that's way more exciting, way more fun to me. So that honestly, I was like, that just makes more sense. And then what's the alternative? Like we just like give up? Like, well, who would want that? Obviously the enemy would want people discouraged, cynical. And I realized some of this theology, like you read the Bible, it's not in the Bible. It's extra biblical. It's how we've taught it. Well, where'd that come from? Is it not life-giving? Well, guess where it didn't come from? The source of all life, right? It's a counterfeit. It's fake. It's wrong. It's not true. So to finish that, just logically, my best understanding is actually, it's a funny way to think about it, but in a way we need evil. Why do we need evil? Well, how else are we going to figure out who we are? Like God created us to be these amazing sons and daughters of him. And we're probably down here for what's Jesus said to be as I am, be perfect as I am. You'll do the things I did and more. Well, he was doing some pretty crazy things. All right. So I don't know what percentage we are of that, but like it's some percentage of that. What he's telling us, greater is possible. Greater is in him. He's got these greater things. How else are we going to lay hold of them if we're not tested, if we're not challenged, if we're not? So darkness is anti-light. It's not actually real. It just requires light to shine and it's gone. So what better way to practice being light than to be like, oh, this challenge, this thing that's coming at me, I need to learn how to make it not a reality. Make it not, because God's truth is the true truth. It's the true reality. But we're in like this weird three-dimensional space where we get to like claim that for ourselves and practice that. Like it's a wild thing, but like you name the challenge, whether it's a medical issue, a business issue, a marriage issue, the greater things, the kingdom is full of life. And it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to learn how to claim that and how to live that and how to breathe that. And I believe that's basically what the kingdom basically is understanding God's reality at higher and higher and higher levels, claiming it for ourselves and manifesting here on earth as in heaven. I mean, that's basically what the Lord's Prayer is commanding us to do or calls us to do.
It's good. You go off of your question too. It's like, if we're playing this game, one side wants you to just mail it in. Maybe this is just like the Civil War revolt. It's all just going to come back. What's the difference?
Weak, passive.
No purpose. Was my life? My life doesn't matter. That's what one side is saying that. And then the other side is saying, hey, you actually can make a difference here. And then you just get to choose which path. Like it's just up to you. And if you take another step towards what we would say God's path would be like, what is my role in this then? Yeah. Am I like in the Civil War? Am I supposed to be a farmer? Am I supposed to like give some food to some soldiers? Am I supposed to give my house to them? Am I supposed to be riding a horse and telling the people like Paul Revere? What is my role? I'm in. Is there something for me to help? I'm on earth. Let's have a cause to fight for, because that's already within us. So it's like, who cares if it's like another revolt? You're here now. You weren't there then. You weren't going to be here in the years to come. So it's like, let's make the most of it now, is how I would go about it. I don't care when Jesus comes back, honestly. Yeah. I'm paying attention. Yeah. But it's like, I'm here right now and I'm going to try to be obedient and do the things that the Lord is inviting me into each day. And I've found as I've done that, I start coming alive. I start getting filled with purpose. Life gets exciting. And
one little anecdote or soundbite. that, I don't know, I feel like the Lord led me to was this idea of Jesus coming back to us is Jesus is going to come through us before he comes back to us physically. So what are we trying to learn? Like Yoda in the Star Wars, like he's available all the time. He's already here. We are meant to be Jesus to the world, which is to say, latch onto his Holy Spirit, understand it, be aligned with it, live it. And isn't that what would you expect Jesus to do anyways? Like come back through and just like kill everyone? Like, no, he's not gonna like just murder everybody. No, it's to transform the world to be just like God, right? We're the bride. We're meant to be like in union. So that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be practicing how to be more like Christ every day. And as we do that, we're literally changing creation. Like we're cells in the body, like we're getting healthier and stronger and more life-giving and easier to kill cancer and all this stuff. Like that's what we're meant to be.
I would say the righteous anger is usually anger, as far as I know, is a secondary emotion. So I'm looking at where's this coming out of? And a lot of times if you dig down into where this anger is coming from, it's coming out of fear. And I would say that's usually an incorrect move. It might feel full of zeal and enthusiasm, and this seems correct. We've got to go protect. We've got to go to this and that because these people are doing that. So it's reactionary and it's fear-based. It's not rooted and grounded in wisdom and like the zoomed out perspective of the situation. So I'm always trying to actually stop and think about my motives. What is going on here? Am I being pulled around by fear, or have I actually sat and discerned through wisdom?
You mentioned the Patriot earlier. That made me think of this. How his story in that movie, I don't remember the main character's name, but this idea of reluctance to take our place because it's easier. Well, in his case, he knew the cost. He knew what war represented. And so the pain had to reach a certain amount where he's like, all right, it's time to bust out the hatchet. Like, it's time to go. I wish I had more options, but I don't. And I'm looking around for who's going to do the work. And I don't see anyone but me. I got to do the work. I think that's part of the season we're in. And that's part of maybe even what you're putting words to. And that's also like the story of humanity. Like we're always like, the thing that we're made to do is always costly. In a way it costs you everything, but it's worth everything. To give your life, there's death sacrifice, living sacrifice. What we're talking about is a living sacrifice. Is every day when you work towards something that matters, towards purpose, towards who you're created to be, it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you in who knows what. The world's thinking, what are you doing? Some comments by people, sheer effort, it's going to cost you, but it's worth it when you get on purpose. And there's nothing like an imminent threat to like make it really clear. I think that's part of the season we're in, is this church theory. It's like goes by the wayside. It's not theory. This is like all around us. You either love God, love others, or you don't. And the rewards are going to be faster. Another way that I've heard the season we're talked about is a season of judgment, which is to say this concept of this great and terrible day. It's mentioned a couple of times in the Bible. It's always a little confusing to me. It was like a great and terrible day. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just one of those things you kind of like blow past because it's unrelatable. I believe the season we're in is actually a season of judgment. And if we're to get back to the emotion of God, would be mixed emotions, where you have tons of grace. Like even now in this timing, like the sense of delay, like why is this taking so long to get to a certain spot? Well, God's literally trying to give every opportunity for us to shift our hearts, align with him, and be on the winning side, honestly. And as much time as we think it needs to give someone else a chance, it needs that much more, or God's willing to go that much extra. But at a certain point, that grace window will be over, and what seeds you've been planting, what seeds you've been sowing, will be harvested. That's what a season of judgment is. So if you've been planting seeds of righteousness, well, guess what? Bam. In a season of judgment, you're gonna experience the fullness of all of that you've been planting, and vice versa. And like literally week by week, I think we're seeing examples of this. The P. Diddy stuff that's just come out recently. That's an example of how long has that been going on? Decades, if not longer. Why is it coming to exposure right now? We're in a season of judgment, and that's just one example. It actually matters what you do behind closed doors. It actually matters, and you can argue, you can say whatever you want to say. You're also gonna have to sit back and watch what happens, because it's not okay. There are consequences. People will face that. That's the season we're in. But as we step up and take our rightful places, which is really what we're saying, that's how we manifest the kingdom. If we're sitting back, like the world literally is missing something if we're not doing what we're created to. But when we do that, then we're more like what the world was created to do. And so I believe we're in a season where the bad guys are basically being tied up, exposed, and create a huge vacuum for goodness, for righteousness to storm out, and not in like a militant, like take over the world, but like in a, I love you. I'm willing to do the hard work to show that love in my business, in my family, in my community. I'm willing to serve. I'm willing to serve on the school board. I'm willing to serve as a you name it. It's all about service. And I just think there's going to be a vacancy, like where bad people are taken out of leadership, creating openings. And sure, will some of those openings be filled with more bad? Some, perhaps. But it's a huge opportunity. I want to probably benefit from some thought, but what jumped to my mind right away was this idea of how simple the fighting is too. Like there's plenty of technicality that's fun to like figure out all this spiritual warfare and all this stuff, but really what we're talking about is service and love. Expressing love in the calling that you're called to. That's ultimately what the kingdom is. It's love. That's your number one weapon. Even when Jesus like healed the guy with the ear, right? It was I don't know, Peter. Yeah.
Used his sword.
He quickly took the worldly view of warfare. You're a threat. You're coming against my king. I'm going to hack your ear off. And the fact that he only got his ear, he probably, what? You know, like, he was probably coming to split him in half.
Turned his head to look at the chart.
Exactly. Interesting. So he healed his ear. Why? Because the warfare isn't physical. It's a spiritual war. One of the things we're taught as Christians, unique to pretty much any other religion in the world, is to love your enemies. We're actually called to love them, not just like put up with them. Love them might mean throwing them in jail. But to love them, to seek what's best for them, to realize that they are another cell of the body that we're all part of. And as much, we don't want them to harm us. We need boundaries. Can't have them harming us, but we're actually meant to love them. So that's one of the most revolutionary things about the kingdom is love. when we take our place, it's going to cost you time, money, maybe sleepless nights, depending on what it is. But that's also where we come truly alive. And when we're that living sacrifice, when we're living for something that matters eternally, you can go to bed at night feeling like, wow, I made a difference.
If we're ready to fight, we don't know what to do. And God's like emotions and stuff, what is it? You just got to start talking to God. I'm going to tell that to everybody. We can hear a good sermon and say, all right, I'm going to grab that and run with that. Hear something about the 7 mountains and run with that. But it's like, if you don't start with, God, what is next for me? Like, that is what you need to do. And he might say, you get a spear right now because you'll do way too much damage with the machine gun. So let's go practice with the spear first. I remember a dream comes to mind one time where I was learning this stuff probably 5 years ago. I had this dream where I was at the bottom of this hill and I had this hatchet. And I was trying to just throw it up the hill and hit a tree. I was trying to do like a hatchet throwing thing. And I was just winging it up the hill, just blindly trying to hit the tree. Totally miss, have to walk up the hill, come back and get it. And it was just a kind of an odd dream. And then the next day I had a dream where I was in my high school and I was wearing like, those old like plastic chairs that are like really crappy old high school chairs. Yeah. And it was like body armor for me. It was like one of those plastic body. It was really tight, wasn't really fitting. And it just like kind of clunky, but it still would maybe kind of work. And as discerning with the Lord from that, he was saying like, I have better armor and better weapons for you. It's kind of a stepping into a better, he was showing me that the hatchet represented my wild prayers. I was just kind of like wildly praying and stuff. I'll pray for this and I'll pray for this person and pray for this. And I was just kind of like, that's what I think I'm supposed to do. So I'm just going to start praying, swinging these prayers out there, but they weren't powerful and effective because they were just like probably based in fear, probably based in reactionary. And he's like, there's an internal settledness and a calm that can come from knowing God better, that your prayers can come out of. And the same with the body armor, which is be the armor of God. You can increase in that, but it's not overnight. Yeah. So that's the stuff we need. We can all continue to grow in, and he's just like the best dad ever. He's going to give you the tools you need at the appropriate time to accomplish the thing that he knows you're capable of doing. And that's the strange thing about the body of Christ too. It's like he doesn't need us to accomplish the things he's doing, but it's like a good dad who's like, he sees the potential in you because he made you and he knows what you're designed to do. So he wants you to be a part of it because he knows how great it is to be a part of something.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and what comes to mind too is how he created the earth. God created the earth for humanity. Like specific, like they work hand in hand. Creation was for us. That's part of the reason the enemy's so ticked off, because we have a special place in God's heart. We are a different thing from angels, like very different. The fact that we come here, we have the veil, we have a unique opportunity to exercise faith in the spiritual realm that like requires like real faith, like real testing. But what came to mind was not only that he could do it on his own, like the whole point is to do it together. Mm-hmm. Like that's like part of the whole point. The bride of Christ joined with the Father. Like that is like two becoming one, having two completely independent consciousnesses, the ability to make our own free will, and we choose to do this together. He already chose. We get to choose. So it's designed that way. And as you were talking about the warfare, more specifically, another piece of warfare that I thought of was recently, like it was a prophetic prayer thing, but it was talking about working towards a time, which is now, of course, when in prayer, we're talking about being powerful and effective prayers. It's like literally coming before the Father, asking him, he needs our voice. The voice, words are creative. like by their very nature, what we speak is literally how creation was made, like through the spoken word. And we are given voice. So our word matters. So that when we go to the Father and ask him, without agenda, Father, what on earth as in heaven do you want to see? What is your will? For me to speak, and he will give you words. And then when you pray those out, speak them into creation. This is part of how we manifest the kingdom. We don't come with agenda. We ask him for what he's wanting to do on earth. We speak it, and then we stand on it and wait for it. That's like this vision that one of my prayer partners gave, was just this idea of a new reality or a new routine, like Bible studies, all that, that's good. But where we're literally going to the Lord, we have our journal, we listen, not for what we want to say, we want to hear what he wants to say. He's using our authority that he created us. We speak it out, that manifests it, and we're literally just writing this stuff down in a journal. And that's like our conversation with God. Like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. What do you want to say? Speak it out. Call it into to be. Wait on it. And then just write in the answer to that. Because if you're doing that, these are perfect prayers, right? Because this is what the Father wants to see manifested on earth. And you're speaking it. So you're not wondering like, oh, is this my flesh? Is this? Might take a while. Like in the case of the prophets, they're speaking to sometimes thousands of years in the future. But that's one of the ways that we can war, so to speak, is just to spend time with our dad, understand what he wants, but that he created us, like he's waiting on us in so much of the stuff. We are here to co-create with him. That's a partnership. So as much as he wants us to seek him, he also gives us great, like he's like, I gave you a brain, I gave you a mind. I want to see you. Like, what do you want to do? Like, you could build it like this, you could build it like that, you could build, like, they're all equally good from a spiritual perspective. Like, what's your creativity? What's your unique fingerprint on that project, right? Anyway, so like that's a big part of just understanding what God's desire is for the earth and then speaking it and taking the steps into it. But like literally how we can gets into not striving and a bunch of stuff when it's just like the idea of like speaking it. So carefree, it's like this applies to your relationship, your marriage, your business, your community, if it's his, the book says, ask and it shall be given, seek and you shall find. Like, it's not without precedent. So practicing that is a big part of it.
Yeah, I think it comes out of relationship. So I would say the Bible, in all of your contact with God, is supposed to be through relationship. So we see these big verses like approach his throne of grace with confidence. And it's like, but if you think God's a prick and that you're annoying him and bothered by him, you're not going to approach the throne. You're not going to ask him for certain things. You don't think he cares about your daily life, So like Jason's saying, you practice this stuff, he'll start to show you what he thinks about you, how he designed you. You'll start to like have more like relational equity, time spent with God. Your confidence increases, and then you start to ask him, just like in any other relationship. When you know somebody better, you start to ask him more intimate questions. What am I doing? What is going on here? What do you think about this? Like this podcast, Lord, I'm involved in this podcast. What do you think about it? What's my role in this? It might not start that way through conversation, but you start getting it going, and then eventually it just deepens, just like any other relationship.
Yeah. I like to say everyone has a relationship with their Heavenly Father. It's just if it's any good. And we have in flow too, where we're like, man, I feel super intimate. I feel super connected. And there's times where we're like, oh, I got a bunch of stuff going on, so I'm like not doing it. And like all of a sudden, if you're spending enough time with the Lord, like you notice that. Like when you have a friend, you're like, oh, I haven't spent as much time together. Like you get sensitive to it. But how powerful it is when you're in that daily conversation, that intimacy, to be whatever the emotional, man, I'm dealing with this. The Heavenly Father wants to be there for you, like whatever the question is, whatever you're dealing with. Very, very practical. Going to the grocery store, like really basic stuff.
You just get to know him better, where it's like you're a little kid at first almost, and he's just like you're learning how he talks and what he thinks about you a little bit. But then eventually you grow up, and now suddenly you're a teenager, or 16-year-old, or 20-year-old, and he's like, I've got things to do. You know him. There's less like, there doesn't need to be as much like back and forth and contemplation sometimes, because you're learning what he's like. You know what he's like. You can eventually just start making decisions on his behalf because he trusts you and you trust him, and just like any relationship. So there's a lot of speed and acceleration in it if you can just plow through the early, whether it feels like awkwardness or the doubt or whatever else, and just even telling him like, this doesn't make sense to me, but I want to know you.
Yeah.
I don't know how. I want to know you, and just like plow through that stuff, and you'll start to see it make more and more sense.
Yeah. When you're saying that, one thing came to mind was the idea of faith. So I grew up with faith thinking like, I don't know, you're supposed to like just have this ridiculous mindset or something and just like trust all that. No, a different way I've internalized faith right now is simply the idea that the spirit realm is real, it exists. It's in fact greater, or it precedes the natural realm. That's really all faith is it's an unseen realm, and we're acknowledging it exists and impacts my day-to-day life. The faith loop is to say, if that's true, then I should be able to test my little toe out here. And you can do these little experiments to say, if that's true, then I should experience this. So you take a faith loop, a faith test, to be like, okay, if that's true, then maybe this God guy exists. So then maybe he cares about me. So maybe I'm going to take this. Maybe he's speaking to me, and you share a word about somebody and they come back and like that actually impacts them. That's a little faith loop. It's like, oh, no, the spirit realm is real. And it's like we all kind of like, or lots of people believe in the spirit realm. They don't know how it works. They don't know. They have weird ideas about it. And so we are creating an understanding of something that cannot be seen, but it's felt, it's touched, it impacts us, right? That's really all faith is this, as you start to understand the financial, or the physics, the spiritual physics of it, then you're getting oriented, and then you can go into deeper and deeper levels of faith acts, because you're like, oh yeah, it's like gravity. I've done it before. I know what happens. God's faithful. God's good. So, and like, it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to know it. Mm-hmm. Like, for sure.
A core belief.
Therefore, I can build on that like a concrete block.
Exactly.
I can trust it. And yeah, your circumstance might not immediately reflect that, but then you stand even harder on it. Then that's how you manifest things. And it's because the spirit realm is greater than the natural realm. And that's, you mentioned doubt. Like, it's okay to not know how it works. It's okay to be experimenting. But the more you can press in, the more you can trust, I hesitate to say blindly, but like, if you do it blindly, like, you can move faster, I guess. But it's okay to take your time too. It's a relationship. God knows, like, I designed this process to work like this. So it's okay to not have it all figured out. One of the things I'm thinking about is like healing. I'm still figuring out how healing works, like actually works. Someone has cancer. Like, when do they get saved? When do they not? That's a very practical thing. But what I do know is that the spirit realm precedes the natural realm. Any malady we have is like, God created our DNA, all this stuff. Like, he could fix it. So it's just like, Lord, teach me how that works. That's just an example.
Yeah. I love thinking about that, where a core belief, somebody says this, where behavior flows out of your core beliefs 100% of the time. So once it's a core belief, it's locked in. Like those are things that nobody could ever talk you out of. They're in there. And then you can build on that, obviously, because they're so sturdy, like the foundation of a house or something like that. Yeah. So get into this relational process with God of like, this is not a core belief for me. I wish it were. Everybody in my church says it was. I've always kind of thought it was, but it's like my behavior's not based on that. My daily life decisions aren't based on this thing. I want this to be true though. Just like for healing, I want to understand this. I want this to like really land so I can build off of it. And you just tell them. You put it out there. Get it out of your head onto a piece of paper, however you want to do that with God. And whether that's 2, 3, 5, 10 things that are just out there, and just watch how he'll slowly and like really brilliantly lock in these heart knowledge moments. And then suddenly your shoulders are a little taller. You know a little bit deeper. You start to make decisions. Somebody says something, I'm not affected the same way. You know? So. I've got one, yeah. It's actually cool to think about it. What's he doing today? What's he saying to me this week or something like that? And it was actually like a concept of manna in the Old Testament, where each day the manna was fresh. And if they tried to save it or store too much, it was like rotten the next day. And that is how it's supposed to be with our relationship with God, where a lot of these, whether it's denominations or the church in general, it's like they built these whole denominations on yesterday's manna. They're like biblical truths, but they're not today. They're not applied through the lens of culture and society and everything right now. So it's like, what are you doing? Like, you're just eating trash and you're not going anywhere. So it's like, I want to be eating what is today for me personally, and just continuing to learn how to do that. So otherwise I'm just bringing my little toolkit around and being like, I know how to solve my problem. I know how to solve everyone's problems based on my past experience.
I just love the idea, like, it's not that truth is relative, but it's like there's truth, and then there's truth applied to right now. Mm-hmm. And how that, like chords on a keyboard, like how that gets played for what God's calling us to do is alive. That's the part that's alive and relevant day by day. And just, it's a day by day discernment. I like, that's just a good word.
There's a couple word studies. It's just been, the Lord's been bringing it to mind lately, but there's the stuff in the Bible, the framework, the constructs, the biblical truths, and then how to apply it in daily life. And then also like the rhema, I think is maybe like the inspired utterance of like the Holy Spirit of like on the fly power.
I don't know, I guess I've been in the prophets in the Old Testament, kind of going back through those, and the Lord brought those to life to me in a new way, in light of all this conversation, actually. And that I'll back up a little bit. In the last 5 years, people had been talking about like Exodus-like stuff. And I was like, sounds nice, of course. Who doesn't want to be delivered and all this stuff? But is this real? So I asked the Lord, I was like, is this real? Is this real for now? Because that's all that really matters. Is it applicable to now, kind of in your manna example too? And I'll just say I got directed, figuring out how God speaks to you, but led to multiple verses talking about a second deliverance. And it's all right there in the Bible. And then you're like, okay, then you're left with, okay, well, geez, it's talking about a second deliverance. When was that? 32 BC? Was it 600? Yeah, like, okay, now you're wondering about that. As I pressed in deeper, like a ton of these prophets, even the minor prophets, the shorter books, are talking about a season where basically God's people, a second deliverance, the latter glory, where God's people achieve like things that have never been achieved on earth before. The rebuilding of the temple as a analogy, because we're also focused. If you look at the Bible, it's constantly the people focused on the stuff, the first heaven understanding, the here and now, and God's always like using. It's usually both and. It usually is actually a story that actually took place or will take place, but there's also a spiritual semblance. Okay, so when we're talking about the rebuilding of the temple, if we're the temple, and again, when's Jesus coming? Well, he's coming. He's going to rebuild Jerusalem. What's Jerusalem? Well, the city on a hill, Zion. That's meant to be us. And he was the cornerstone, is the cornerstone. He's the rock. Even in Revelations, it talks about the foundation with the 12 layers or 12 rocks or something. And that's talking about the apostles, obviously, and then the tribes built on that. Anyway, I mean, when you ask the Lord these seemingly not crazy questions, but like deep, specific questions, all of a sudden this stuff just starts popping out. So I've been munching on that for, probably 2 or 3, 4 years, just as I was like, are we in the Exodus season? So it keeps showing that, and like I become more and more convinced of it because you just keep reading all these prophets and it just pops off the page. So I'd say in the last week though, it's all around like mobilization around that stuff. Like it's real and people need to know this stuff. There's probably not that many people that take the time to study it. So there's a calling and there's a piece of just like, wow, this is amazing. Like share it with people and like not do your gifting and saying stuff, but just to share the message. And if it's real, if it's anointed, then there's probably going to be some activity that happens around that. So just in very practical ways, just figure out what that means for me and the next step with our business. And it's so smashed together between business, calling, like it's just like the next thing, like how I get paid, how I take down money, and what I do. Those are like, they're of course related, but they're like, it's just like, what does God have me to do next and next and next and next?
Cool.
Did we say that was the last question?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this one felt good. Well, we'll wrap up. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Take Your Mountain. And I think this has been a good path. We'll probably continue just to press into the season of times, very specific, practical questions where we can take some theory and apply it in useful ways, because that's, at the end of the day, that's all theory is really good for, is like finding ways to apply it. Things can be kind of heady at times, but then really finding ways to bring it back into a season time of what's the application. But I really feel what God's calling us to do is we understand who we are in him and the purpose he called us to. As we step into that, this is literally how we build the kingdom. And the more that we can, this happens unconsciously, subconsciously, but I believe the more we can consciously pursue that, we'll get there faster and ultimately get the fruit sooner. So that's really, really what we're seeking to explore here with this podcast.
I agree.
Thanks.